Chapter 2. Early in the afternoon they reached the sea, and Will knew he was near the end of his journey. Castle Seacliff was set on a large leaf-shaped island, separated from the mainland by 100 meters of deep water. At low tide, a narrow causeway allowed access to the island, but at high tide, as it was now, a ferry provided transport across. The difficult access had helped keep Seacliff secure for many years, and was one of the reasons why the Fife had become something of a backwater. In earlier times, of course, the raiding Scandians and their wolf ships had made things quite lively, but it had been some years now since the sea-wolves from the north had raided the coast of Araluan. The island was perhaps 12 kilometers in length and 8 across, and Will could not yet see the castle itself. He assumed it would be set somewhere in the high ground toward the middle. That was basic strategic thinking. For the moment, however, it was hidden from sight. Will had debated stopping for a meal at noon, but now so close to the end of his journey, he decided to press on. There would be an inn of some kind in the village that would huddle close to the castle walls, or he might find a meal in the castle kitchens. He tugged the lead rein to bring the pack-horse alongside, and leaned over to inspect the wounded dog. Her eyes were closed, and her nose rested on her front paws. He could see the black sides moving in and out as she breathed. There was a little more blood around the lips of the wound, but the main flow had been stanched. Satisfied that she was comfortable, Will touched a heel to Tug's side, and they moved on down to the ferry, a large, flat-bottomed punt that was drawn up on the beach. The operator, a heavily muscled man of about 40, was sprawled on the deck of his craft, sleeping in the warm autumn sunshine. He awoke, however, as some sixth sense registered the slight jingle of harness from the 2 horses. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, then came quickly to his feet. "I need to get across to the island," Will told him, and the man saluted clumsily.
"Yes, indeed, sir. Of course. At your service, Ranger."
There was a hint of nervousness in his voice. Will sighed inwardly. He was still unused to the thought that people were wary of rangers, even one as fresh-faced as he was. He was a naturally friendly young man, and he often longed for easy companionship with other people. But that was not the rangers' way. It served their purpose to remain aloof from ordinary people. There was an air of mystery about the Ranger Corps. Their legendary skill with their weapons, their ability to move about unseen, and the secretive nature of their organization all added to their mystique. The boatmen heaved on the thick cable that ran from the mainland to the island, passing through large pulleys set at either end of the punt. The punt, afloat at one end, moved easily from the beach until it rested wholly in the water. Will guessed that the pulley arrangements gave the operator a mechanical advantage that allowed him to move the large craft easily. There was a tariff board nailed to the railing, and the operator saw him study it.
"No charge for you, Ranger, sir. Free passage for you."
Will shook his head. Halt had impressed on him the need to pay his way.
"Be beholden to no one," he had said. "Make sure you owe nobody any favours."
He calculated quickly. 1/2 a royal per person, and the same for each horse, plus 4 pennigs for the other animals. Close enough to 2 royals all told. He swung down from the saddle, took a gold 3 royal piece from his purse, and handed it to the man. "I'll pay," he said. 2 royals is close enough." The man looked at the coin, then looked at the rider and the 2 horses, puzzled. Will jerked his head toward the pack-horse. "There's another animal on the pack-horse," he explained. The ferry operator nodded, and handed him a silver 1 royal piece in change.
"Right enough, sir,"
he said. He glanced curiously at the pack-horse as Will led it onto the punt, taking in the dog in its snug retreat.
"Good-looking dog, that'n," he said. "He's yours, is he?"
"I found her injured by the road," Will said. "Someone had cut her with a blade of some sort and left her to die." The boatman rubbed his stubbly chin thoughtfully.
"John Buttle as a shepherd like that one, and he'd be the kind to injure a dog and leave her in the way. He's a nasty temper, that John, particularly when he's drunk."
"And what does this John Buttle do?" Will asked.
The boatman shrugged. "He's a herder by trade, but he does most things. Some say he does his real work at nights along the roads, looking for travellers who are out after dark. But no one's proved it. He's a mite too handy with that spear of his for my liking. He's a good man to stay away from."
Will glanced at the pack-horse again, thinking of the cruel gash in the dog's side. "If Buttle's the one who hurt that dog, he'll do well to stay away from me," he said coldly. The boatman studied him for a moment. The face was young and well-featured, but there was a hard light in the eyes he saw. He realized that with rangers it never did to assume too much. This pleasant-looking lad wouldn't be wearing the ranger gray and green if he didn't have steel in him. Rangers were deceptive folk, and that was a fact. There were even some who held that they were skilled in the black arts of magic and sorcery, and the boatman wasn't altogether sure that those people didn't have the right of it. Surreptitiously making a sign to ward off evil, he moved to the front of the punt, glad for an excuse to break off the conversation.
"Best be getting us across, then," he said.
Will sensed the change in atmosphere. He glanced at Tug and raised his eyebrows. The horse didn't deign to notice. As the boatman heaved again on the thick hawser, the punt slid across the water toward the island, small waves burbling under the blunt prow and slapping against the low timber sides. Will noticed that the ferry operator's home, a small planked hut with a thatched roof, was on the island side, presumably as a security measure. The prow of the ferry soon grated into the island's coarse sand, the current slewing it sideways a little as the forward progress stopped. The operator unhitched the single rope rail across the front and gestured for Will to disembark. Will swung up astride Tug, and the horse's hooves clopped on the planks as they stepped carefully forward. "Thank you," he said, as Tug stepped off onto the beach. The ferry operator saluted again.
"At your service, Ranger," he said.
He watched the slim, erect figure as he rode into the trees and was lost from sight. It took another half-hour to reach the castle. The road wound upward toward the center of the island, through well-spaced, winding-swept trees. There was plenty of light, unlike in the thick forests around Castle Redmont, or the dark pine forests of Scandia that Will remembered all too well. The leaves had turned, but so far most of them remained on the branches. All in all, it was a pleasant country. As he rode, Will saw plenty of evidence of game. Rabbits, of course, and wild turkey. Once he caught a quick flash of white, and then a deer showed him its hindquarters as it bounded away. Poaching was probably rife here, he thought. Will had a basic sympathy for the villagers who sought occasionally to augment their diet with venison or game birds. Fortunately, poaching was a matter of local law, and would be policed by the Baron's gamekeepers. As a matter of policy, though, Will would need to discover the identity of the local professionals. Poachers could be a prime source of information about goings-on, and information was a ranger's stock in trade. The trees eventually thinned, and he rode out into the sunlight again. The winding uphill road had brought him to a natural plateau, a wide plain perhaps a kilometer across. In the center of the plain stood Castle Seacliff and its dependent village, a huddle of thatched cottages set close to the castle walls. The castle itself, to one used to the impressive mass of Castle Redmont, or the soaring beauty of the King's Castle Araluan, was something of a disappointment. It was little more than a fort, Will realized, with the surrounding walls barely topping 5 meters in height. As he looked more closely, he could see that at least one section of the wall was constructed from timber, large trees set vertically in the ground and bound together with iron brackets. It was an effective enough barrier, he thought, but it lacked the dramatic impact of Redmont's massive ironstone walls. Yet they were solidly buttressed towers at each corner of the central keep, which would provide a haven of last resort in the event of an attack. Over the keep he could see the Stag's Head banner of Baron Urgle as it stirred in the light afternoon sea breeze. "We're here," he told Tug, and the horse shook his mane as he heard his voice. He had reined in at the first sight of the castle. Now he touched Tug's side with his heels, and they started forward again. As ever, the pack-horse moved off a little more slowly, dragging momentarily on the lead rope as they made their way through the open farm fields toward the castle. There was a smell of smoke in the air. The corn stalks had been bundled up and burned after the harvest was brought in, and they were still smoldering. In a week or two, the farmers would plow the ashes back into the fields, and the sequence would begin again once more. The smell of smoke, the bare fields, and the low-angled autumn afternoon sunlight all evoked memories in Will. Memories of growing up, of harvests and harvest festivals, of hazy summers, smoky autumns, and snow-covered winters, and, in the last 6 years, of the deep affection that had grown between him and his mentor, the deceptively grim-faced ranger called Halt. There were few workers in the fields, and they stopped to stare at the cloaked figure as he rode toward the castle. He nodded to one or two of those who were closest to him, and they nodded back, cautiously, raising their hands in a salute. Simple farm people didn't understand rangers, and as a result they didn't wholly trust them either. Of course, Will knew, in times of war or danger, they would look to rangers for help and protection and leadership. But now, with no threatening danger, they would keep their distance from him. The occupants of the castle would be a different matter. Baron Urgel and his battle-master, Will searched for the name for a few seconds, then recalled it was Norris, understood the role of the Ranger Corps and the value that its members brought to the kingdom's 50 fiefs. They didn't fear rangers, but that didn't mean he would enjoy a close relationship with them either. Theirs would be a working partnership. "Remember," Halt had told him, "our task is to assist the barons, but your first loyalty is to the king. We are the direct representatives of the king's will, and sometimes that may not exactly coincide with local interests. We cooperate with the barons, and we advise them, but we maintain our independence from them. Don't allow yourself to become indebted to your baron, or become too close to the people of the castle." Of course, in a fief like Redmont, where Will had done his training, things were slightly different. Baron Errold, the Lord of Redmont, was a member of the king's inner council. That allowed for a closer relationship between the baron, his officers, and Halt. The ranger assigned to his fief, but in general a ranger's life was a solitary one. There were compensations, of course. Chief among them was the camaraderie that existed between the members of the corps itself. There were 50 rangers on active service, one for each fief in the kingdom, and they all knew each other by name. Indeed, Will was well acquainted with the man he was replacing at Seacliff. Bartle had been one of his examiners for his annual assessments as an apprentice, and it was his decision to retire that had led to Will's being presented with his silver oak leaf, the symbol of a full-fledged ranger. Bartle, getting on in years and unable to face the rigors of ranger life, hard riding, sleeping rough, and constant vigilance, had traded his own silver oak leaf for the gold of retirement. He had been reassigned to the corps headquarters at Castle Araluan, where he was working in the archives section, compiling the history of the corps. Will smiled briefly. He had grown to like Bartle, a well-read and amazingly knowledgeable man, in spite of the fact that their first few meetings had been occasions of distinct discomfort for Will. Bartle had been an expert at devising tests for the apprentice that were calculated to make the young man's life miserable. Will had since come to value the tough questions and difficult problems that Bartle had posed for him. They had all helped prepare him for the difficult life of a ranger. That life itself was the other chief compensation for the solitary nature of the ranger's day-to-day existence. There was a deep satisfaction and an irresistible allure of being a part of an elite band that knew the inner workings and the political secrets of the whole kingdom. Ranger apprentices were recruited for their physical skills, coordination, nimbleness, speed of hand and eye, but even more for their natural curiosity. A ranger sought always to know more, to ask more, and to find out more about whatever went on around him. As a youngster, before Halt had recruited him, that restless curiosity and the precociousness that stemmed from it had caused Will more than his share of troubles. He was entering the small village now, and more people were observing him. Most of them wouldn't make eye contact, and the few who did dropped their gaze when he nodded to them. Pleasantly enough, he thought. They saluted with a clumsy movement of hand to brow, and moved aside to let him pass, quite needlessly, in fact, as there was plenty of room on the broad village street. He made out the symbols for the usual trades that could be found in any village: blacksmith, carpenter, cobbler. At the end of the single street was a larger building. It was the only 2-story structure in the village, and it had a wide veranda at the front and the symbol of a tankard hanging above the door. The inn, he realized. It looked clean and well kept, the shutters of the upstairs bedroom windows freshly painted and the mud walls whitewashed. As he watched, one of the upstairs windows opened, and a girl's head appeared at the opening. She looked to be about 19 or 20, with dark, close-cropped hair and wide-set green eyes. She had a clear complexion and was remarkably pretty. What was more, alone among the people of the village, she continued to meet his gaze as he looked at her. In fact, she went so far as to smile at him, and when she did, the face transformed from pretty to breathtaking. Will, unsettled by the reluctance of people to meet his gaze, was even more unsettled now by the girl's undisguised interest in him. "So you're the new ranger," he imagined her thinking. "You look awfully young for the job, don't you?" As he rode under the window, he realized uncomfortably that he had raised his head to watch her. His mouth had gaped a little. He snapped it shut and nodded at the girl, stern and unsmiling. Her grin grew wider, and it was he who broke the eye contact first. He had planned to stop for a quick meal at the inn, but the disconcerting presence of the girl made him change his mind. He recalled the written directions he had been given. His own cabin would be some 300 meters beyond the village, on the road to the castle and sheltered by a small grove of trees. He could see the grove now, and he touched his heels to Tug's side, letting the little horse break into a trot as they left the village behind. He could sense 20 or 30 pairs of eyes boring curiously into the back as he rode. He wondered if the green eyes from the upper room of the inn were among them, then shrugged the thought aside. The cabin was a typical ranger's house, built of logs with large flat river stones for roofing. There was a small veranda at the front of the house and a stable and saddling yard behind it. It nestled under the trees, and he was surprised to see a curl of smoke from the chimney at one end of the building. He swung down from Tug's saddle, a little stiff after a day's riding. There was no need to tether Tug, but he looped the pack-horse's reins around one of the veranda posts. He checked the dog, saw that she was asleep, and decided she could stay where she was for a few minutes more. If there had been any doubts that this was to be his house, they were dispelled by the carved outline of an oak leaf on the lintel over the door. He stood for a moment, scratching Tug's ears as the horse nuzzled gently against him. "Well, boy," he said, "looks like we're home."